Hi, welcome back. My name is Aaliyah, and I'm super excited about this episode today because it's been my goal for this channel to be able to meet new people from different states or different countries, or even have some viewers come on, share a drink with me, and talk about design. So today joining me is the head interior designer from Piano, Australia, and we're going to be talking about the design process and some of her experiences as an interior designer, and she will just share some of her wisdom with us and help me as a young designer navigate my way, and hopefully she will be able to give some wisdom to you. Please welcome all the way from Sydney, Australia, Petra. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and cheers. Could you just share a little bit about your design journey and how you ended up in Sydney?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I think I've been around a bit. I started off working for Wilson Associates as an intern in Dallas, Texas. And that was my first exposure to interior design. And I was like, wow, I love this, want to do that. And they asked if I wanted to join their office in New York. This is when I was 21. So I got some great exposure to projects early on in New York, and I just ended up falling in love with it. At the same time, I was also studying interior design in Sweden. So I finished my degree, 2-year degree in Sweden, interior design. And then I joined Hirschbedner Associates in London. Stayed there for a year, moved back to Sweden, and actually started working for Tilburg Design, which are doing cruise ships. So that's how I ended up getting into the cruise ship after working on land-based projects. And from there, I was with them for about 3 years, which was great, and great exposure to the marine industry. I was asked to join the P&O Australia as heading up the design department. So I've been doing that now for about 4 years.
I want to talk today about, your design process, and some people might not know about the marine industry and what dry docks are and how crazy they are. So can you just share a little bit about what a dry dock is?
Sure. I mean, I came exactly like that person because I was like, oh, I love it. I know I love hotels and restaurants and all that, but I'd probably never been on a cruise ship in my life, and definitely not on a dry dock.
Yeah.
So I think I had a pretty big shock when I got there. But a dry dock is when the ship goes into dock, and you basically take all the water out from that dock, and it stands on a dry platform. So you can also do all the technical work around it and paint the hull. And so that's the main reason also why ships go in, because there needs to be technical requirements and all the regulations. And while the ship is out of service, you make sure to do the interior spaces as well.
So what's the time frame of a dry dock? Are you working on the ship for a week, 2 weeks? What is it like?
I think every brand has different ones. And I think it all depends on the scope. There could be a larger scope and a smaller scope. And also the technical scope can drive that. We basically do about 12 days.
Okay.
So it's pretty hardcore.
How far in advance are you preparing for a dry dock?
I think that's a little bit the same answer. It depends a bit on the scope, if it's a large or a small one, and how much budget you have. And I think I'm lucky to be in-house because it always gives you a little bit more time, because you know the fleet from the beginning and you're in the group. I think about 8 months design work, but in that time there might also be another ship that you need to work on. And but if I have 8 months, I'm pretty confident with that. I'm quite happy with 8 months.
What do you think is the hardest part about a dry dock?
The work you've done before dry dock is what's going to make the difference. So I always try to think that dry dock is 5% of my scope. So basically I want to go to dry dock and be done with, like, I know that we have all the details sorted, communication, completely teamwork with all the contractors. And that's, to me, when I'm like, that was a successful dry dock. But there will always be like a 5-minute heart attack every day when the contractor's like, oh my God, we tried to remove this and we found this massive steel plate and we're not going to be able to fix your sofa here. And that's when you just need to, like, step away from it. It's like, okay guys, give me 30 minutes. Don't freak out. Just know that that's happening. And I think my first dry dock, I was like, oh my God, a steel beam. Like, what does this mean? And now after like 15, I'm like, yeah, like I know we'll figure it out somehow. Know your time and space as well, that you don't need to make a decision in a second, that you have the opportunity to step away and come back to it. But otherwise, it's quite harsh conditions in the sense of it's loud and there might be someone hammering on your balcony in the middle of the night, or so trying to take care of yourself at the same time and like eat as well as you can, sleep as well as you can.
Because are you on the ship while they're doing a dry dock, or are you at a hotel and you're coming in for like?
I always prefer to stay on the ship.
Okay.
So I just want to wake up, be in the middle of all the dust and get my hands dirty. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some mistakes or lessons you have learned after all the dry docks you've done that you could give to someone maybe doing their first dry dock or even their just first installation as a designer?
I think, as with most things, communication is really key. And that's, again, like the communication leading up to the project as well. If you are not able to communicate clearly your vision and actually get that down on with your drawings and your specifications, and that might feel great before you get to dry dock, but that's going to come to the surface really quick. So make sure everyone, don't take a yes or we know what we're doing for an answer. I would always be like, no, show me your sketch, and I want to be able to sign that off and make sure. So that's an important thing. And even if the project manager is like, oh yeah, we got this, like we know what we're doing, I would just be like, yeah, but all the workers around. So I would ask, like, make sure to always have printed plans. And like, I usually ask the contractors to bring that. And it's like, I want to see a printed plan taped up in that space, along with a rendering, just to make sure everyone is actually working in that space can see the vision and know the goal. And that usually kind of excites everyone as well.
Yeah.
So be super clear with communication. And the second thing would be, don't rush to decisions, like really step back, take some time, make sure what is right in that situation.
Yeah.
And the third thing that is really challenging is, since everything is happening so quick, like I've yet never done a dry dock where everything goes exactly to my drawings or to plan. So you're forced to do some like, on-site decisions, and to really, I know it's stressful and you're drained and it's hardcore, but really try to document those changes. Even if you like hand sketch a little bit how the floor plan ended up, it's really helpful for the ship later on to have an updated floor plan of like, this is actually how I want the restaurant to be set up.
Okay. What are the initial steps that you take on a new project?
I think, product management is extremely important. So the way you have built up your foundation is going to filter through the whole design process as well. Because if you're really disorganized, it's just going to get harder and harder the more information you need to get onto. I personally have a folder system that I'm like religious about. Like my philosophy is that I want anyone to be able to access my folders and know that every single project is set up the same thing. So if I'm like, hey, can you check that master presentation for that project we did 5 years ago? Everyone in the team should just know how to do that, and everyone should know how to file it, because that just sets you up to handle any information. And also if I was about to leave or anything, anyone could take over and know that, and it's not just my system. I think otherwise the second step is like, okay, I got my structure. I'm going to listen to the brief from the client, because I think it's important to remember that no matter as much as you wish to design for yourself, you're not. Like the client, you're always designing for a client and ultimately their guests. So that should be on top of your mind as well, who you're designing for. And then, you have to try to understand what the client, what problems you're trying to solve for the client, really. And that to me should then be on the top of the design process as well, because if you don't understand what the goal is, it's hard to know what you're designing. And a way of doing that I do is create a list of operational needs. Say, for an example, before designing a restaurant, start with asking operational needs of how much seating do you need in here to make this work? Do you usually have a Metro D station? Service stations, like what's your quote on how many service stations do you need per seat? Like, because that would just set you up to use the fixed elements that you shouldn't touch, and that's a lot easier to design
Oh,
around what you, rather than just starting from a blank canvas and like, oh, this looks cool, and you end up with 200 seats too little, you know.
yeah.
And tagging on to that, once I've done the operational list, I would probably do the look at the space and see like, okay, what limitations do I have in the space? So, you know, I shipped, there will be columns and there will be pillars, and as much as you want to remove them, you're not touching them.
You're problem solvers.
Yeah. So I would like, okay, how do I turn something that I can't touch into an opportunity of like, oh, maybe I can build a corner wall there and hide the column, and that could create a room, like a room within the room without enclosing it. And so just those things before I even start sketching and looking at a mood or whatever.
Yeah.
And that would be the step after, I think. I'm very a firm believer when I design, I need to sit with creating the mood while with the brief, sketching the floor space and the like accommodation plan, along with almost like, oh, the materials. Like I do it very organic. So I'm not like, I'm going to sketch this, then I'm going to do the mood board. And then I'm kind of like, everything is linked in together.
Yeah.
And I think also before you even start the design process, it is important to know, okay, what timeline am I working towards here as well? Because that you could just set yourself up to understand what you need to have done in that space. So that's kind of how I start the process.
When you come up with the concepts of a project, are you more of a your way, you set the trend, or do you follow trends? Or, you know, I'm just wondering, as like a young designer, like what are those steps in concepts?
Sure. Again, like I think especially a cruise ship is quite extreme, because normally maybe a project would be one restaurant, and suddenly you're like, oh, I'm designing 8 restaurants and 14 bars, like a lot of spaces. So I think, again, you need to keep the brief always in mind, and like that should be the center. And then after that, I personally don't follow trends. Like maybe you do it unconsciously as well, because you see things around you and you pick it up. But for me, always designing is about how you make someone feel when you step into a space. And we've all been to that house where it's a little bit awkward, where like everyone gathers around the kitchen, but there's no way to sit, and you're like, oh, should I sit on this sofa? Like, I don't want to break that table. And that's just not a comfortable feeling. So I definitely believe that furniture plans and everything can actually, you can communicate a feeling of how you want to be. So I always try to design around like opening up for conversation. So if you have a very large coffee table with like heaps of furniture around it, you could sit 2 groups without feeling awkward, because it's like big enough to talk and not having your backs against each other. So I'd rather do that, and then focusing on color schemes and everything a little bit more based on the brief and what I'm trying to achieve in that space.
So what are some strategies that you use for maybe brand standards? I'm not sure if you have to follow brand standards or anything like that. So do you have any idea of strategies you could use for that?
Yeah, so we don't really, I'm not given like a big 100-page binder to follow or anything. It's not like you have to use red, blue, and green. Like I'm lucky that way, because it's probably some brands have a lot of standards. I think I'm working super closely with the operational team. So we like, every time we have a new space to design, I'm like, okay, what's the ideal table size for us in this restaurant in order to meet the capacity? And after, you know, a couple of years working with the same team, we kind of based our brand standards when it comes to design on what has been working. And it's like, okay, in a very busy all day dining, we are going to use a more durable material, and that needs to be cleaned more often. And a lot of the things we've also learned by making a lot of mistakes. So. I guess we have like an unofficial brand standards just because of what we have experienced.
Yeah, this is kind of a hard question, but if you could explain project management in 3 words, what would it be?
Wow, yeah, that is hard. I just think I've honestly been so lucky to work with amazing leadership and project managers. But one thing that I keep on coming back to is communication.
Mhm.
I think if you're gonna lead a project, you need to be able to communicate your vision, your thoughts. Don't be scared of saying that this actually is not right, and just own that. Because at the end of the day, you need to keep the
Yeah.
goal up. Like, I want to deliver, and I want to make the best possible experience for the guests. Ultimately, probably vision. I think as a project manager, you need to have that vision of where you want to end up, and then again, be able to communicate that vision to your
Yeah.
team and external and internal team. And being organized, you need to know where you have your things, and you need to, again, like, not waste your precious time looking for an old, presentation, a folder or
Yeah.
email. Like, that would be my biggest thing. Like, set yourself up to not waste any time.
Okay, so you work with other people, vendors, contractors. So how do you stay organized with working with so many people in a dry dock?
Yeah, and I mean, hey, that's a good point. And I think, again, a cruise ship is like, I don't know, like, it's just a hotel on like speed. It's just crazy.
So many moving parts are happening.
Yeah, and as a designer, I think you just really need to start realizing that you are going to have so many different people with inputs that you almost become like a hub of collecting that information, and then you're going to put that together in one product.
Yeah.
So you really need to get yourself organized. And the way I do it is having my folder system that I'm like, don't touch, don't try to change anything of that. But for me, it also is to build up that teamwork and team sense around every single person that is part of the project. We would be nothing without our suppliers. We would not be able to deliver a project, and I want to make sure they know that as well. And you would never be better than the way you communicate to them. I don't want to waste anyone's time, and I don't want anyone to waste my time. So I would be like, hey guys, I'm looking to weave a X amount of fabric. I need you to meet X budget, and I need it to be done by this date.
Okay.
Because if you keep on going, and this could be for any contractor or any external, and you're like, oh, just shoot for the stars. Like, I just want this. And that happens as well.
Yeah.
And then you shoot for the stars, and it's like, oh, this is way too expensive. And it's like, well, okay, that was a bit of a waste of time. So I think it's a little bit easier when you're on the owner's side because you have access to all that. If you're an external designer, it might be tricky sometimes to actually know exactly what your budget is. If you can communicate clearly to every single person that you're working with, I think that's leading up to feeling that they're part of the team, you're communicating. I would always make sure to send them photos of a finalized project and be like, listen, this turned out great. Or just also leading up to the next project, if you can get people engaged and wanting to achieve, the best possible results, again, for your end guests. That's my ultimate goal. So really take care of your relationships with every single person.
Teamwork is key.
Yeah, 100%.
So, we talked about your organization and you have the folder system. Are there any other ways that you keep a project organized?
I'm a true believer in, like, every single thing you do every day leads to the next step. So I'm the opposite of someone doing a last minute stressed deadline. Like, I'm actually like, okay, I'd rather push really hard in the beginning and actually gain a little bit of momentum.
Yeah.
And then if I finish a week before deadline, I'd rather sit back and like, cool, that was nice. But I would just try to get ahead of the game. Like, really try to push in the beginning and work those extra hours. It's a lot easier to do that when you are not under pressure of having to deliver, because the server is going to crash that night, or it's going to be the dog ate something that was going to happen. I guess everyone knows that coming from school, but just don't put yourself in that situation.
What do you wish the design school taught you that you know now?
I just think the best experience you can get, like, rather than school, is also to get out there. And one thing that I'm constantly realizing, not just with design, but everything in life, is like, you don't need to go to school to learn. Like, if you have a passion for something, watch YouTube, order that book. It doesn't need to be a teacher telling you to order that book. You can read that book without taking an exam, and you can learn as much if you want.
Yeah.
So I would just constantly challenge myself to like, how can I learn and without or outside of school.
Yeah.
And in the same way, when you enter this industry, you will realize quickly that you're working with some of the best people in the world, in the best or on top of their industry. So in dry dock, if you think about it, you're like, I have the top carpet layers in the world. I have the top tilers from Italy flown in. And I would just not be afraid of putting yourself out there and be like, hey, how was this tile to lay? Is there anything I can do in this specification next time that will make your work easier?
Yeah.
And give feedback to those suppliers as well. You'd be like, hey, the carpet installer actually really struggled with the way you labeled your carpet rolls because it didn't make sense, and that delayed us on site.
Yeah.
So talk to everyone and put yourself in a position of like, what can I do better to help you next time?
Yeah. That was great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was great to have you on my show.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you soon.
Yes.